Gentlemen, please be seated. We're about to begin our second session for the day, which is the book launch of Benazir Bhutto, A Multidimensional Portrait. The book is available on our stalls, and there will be an author signing later on. As per the format of our sessions, of course, there will be a discussion followed by a 10-minute question and answer period, which I'm hoping that we will be able to maintain this time around. Should I wait? 2 minutes.
Right.
We're about to begin. This session will be moderated by none other than the most famous Victoria Schofield. Victoria Schofield is a writer and commentator who has written extensively on South Asia, an acknowledged expert on the Kashmir issue, and the author of several books such as Kashmir in the Crossfire and Kashmir in Conflict. And she's been known for her great love for the country of Pakistan, which she first visited in 1978 when she attended Bhutto's appearance in Supreme Court. So, speaking of Victoria.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back here at the 6th Karachi Literature Festival, and my great thanks to Amina Saeed and all her team for inviting me and all they've done. I've watched the Karachi Literature Festival grow from its first inception, and it's really grown, as we would all say, from strength to strength. I'm particularly delighted today to be chairing this session on Benazir Bhutto, A Multinational Portrait. It's well known that I was at Oxford University with Benazir Bhutto, and it was my friendship with her which first inspired me to come to Pakistan in 1978. It's a very long time ago. I often get asked by encouraging people, is this your first visit to Pakistan? And I have to say, oh no, I've come here yet again. And I've been visiting the country regularly ever since that first visit, which I must admit was very difficult. I'm glad also this session is following on from Najam Sethi's session, and if he was still here, I would point out that I remain an idealist. I remain an idealist for the future of Pakistan and the resolution of the Kashmir issue, and I am wearing my red shoes as he was wearing his red socks and red tie, just to show that I remain young at heart. Well, we're here to talk about Anna Suvorov's book on Benazir, and I really think I'm thrilled that she's written this book because she's written it in a way that it's not a biography of Benazir, it's not intended to be a biography of Benazir, but it's what she calls an anthropological portrait. I also have here with me Syeda, Abida, Hussain. We've known each other, Syeda, since many years, and also Zafar, Hilaly, a diplomat who has known Benazir, I think, since 1990 and worked closely with her. So in addition to hearing from Anna about the book, I'm also going to be hearing from Abida Hussain and Zafar Hilaly, their impressions both of how Anna Suvorova has recreated Benazir and what they think, and also their recollections of Benazir. So firstly, I'm going to start, Anna, with you. You only met Benazir once, and yet that meeting inspired you to follow her political progress, to follow her as a politician, and then to write this book. So can you tell me a bit about how you came to be inspired? How was that meeting so impressionable for you?
Well, Khawatino Hazrat, I am very happy to be here, and I'm very grateful to Oxford University Press and to Amina Sayed in personal to be invited and to present in such a Shandar gathering. Well, I made few attempts to come to Karachi Literary Festival, but all these times fate was against me. But now, thank God, I'm here, and we are deciding to discuss my book. Why it is called Multidimensional Portrait? Those of you who know old European masters and their paintings, maybe remember that all the European masters depicted their heroes in full face, profile, and three-quarter views simultaneously on one canvas. So in this case, I call my book Multidimensional Portrait because I try to show Benazir Bhutto sometimes full face, sometimes profile, sometimes in three-quarter view. Well, I really met Benazir only once in 1995 when she was the prime minister and inaugurated a big and very posh conference in Islamabad called the Conference of Bainul Aqwami Conference of Intellectuals, Writers, Good Wishes, and so on. So she was inaugurating the conference, and after the inauguration ceremony, people were queuing up to speak to her, but my dear friend Iftihar Arif took me by hand and that pushed me up to her, and she had no choice and I had no choice, so we spoke to each other perhaps 10 minutes. She asked me about the future subject of my Makala, because I was going to make a paper on this conference. And when I told her that will be Shuara or Awliya of Sindh, like Shah Abdul Latif Bitai and Lal Shahbaz Kalandar, she was interested. And she asked me more questions. Before I met Benazir, I met many outstanding political leaders of your part of the world. I met Srimati Indira Gandhi 2 weeks before her assassination. I met her son, Rajiv Gandhi. I met Sirimava Bandaranaike, and I met Hasina Wazir. And with those ladies, of course not with Rajiv Gandhi, with ladies I spent much more time than with Benazir, but none of them were listening to me so humanly and attentively as she did. And it was something that gave me a click. And after I came home, I started reading her articles, her speeches, her books, and it gave me, it was a motivation. And another motivation to write this book was a very strange one. In 2007, during the emergency, I was in Lahore. And Benazir Bhutto, as you know, the same moment came back from Dubai to Pakistan. And I was eyewitness of her triumph, of her, this beautiful ceremonial savari while in Lahore down the Mall Street. And then I came home and the news came that she was assassinated. And it was strange enough that nothing happened in Russia. Of course, there were coverage and condolences from President, Prime Minister, government officials, but people were absolutely indifferent. And they asked, Pakistan, it's so far, it's so strange country. They kill people every day. And the recollection came of my childhood. It was the climax of Cold War. I was a girl. and the news of JFK Kennedy assassination came by radio. We still didn't have TV. And people were crying. Russian women were crying. Why? Because he is young, because he is good looking, and because he has small children. So the case have passed, and the world became more restless. Because Benazir was threefold more beautiful than Kennedy. She was mother of three, and she was young, and Russians, they didn't cry. So I decided I will write the book for them, and they will be crying.
Thank you, Anna. Well, I think one of the things you highlight very clearly in the book is Benazir Bhutto's role as a woman in a Muslim society. And as we all know, and everybody in the audience knows, that really she was the flag bearer for women emerging into politics. The fact that she became Prime Minister of Pakistan speaks volumes for the progress of women and women's rights. Now, Syeda Abida Hussain, you also are a female politician, and you've been in politics for many years. I want to ask you really how your friendship with Benazir grew, and how also you feel her struggle has assisted women in politics in Pakistan.
Well, you know, Victoria, initially when Benazir returned from exile in your country and came back to Pakistan and had a very, very exhilarating welcome everywhere she went, her arrival in Lahore is recalled to this day as having been a great event. This was 1986.
You're talking about the arrival in 1986 when she came back.
That's right. And we were in the assembly at the time. My husband and I were part of a very small opposition. We invited Benazir for dinner in a hotel in Rawalpindi. And she came looking very beautiful, and she was very imperial. And she observed during the dinner that the assembly that we were all members of would be dissolved the following day. So one of us asked her why she thought this, and she said, because the generals are so panicked by this dinner, by the opposition inside the parliament and outside getting together. So I said that, no, I think that it'll take a lot more to make the generals shiver. And I think we'll go back to the assembly as usual the following day. Anyway, I thought that she was naive, she was very gorgeous, very well spoken, very charming, but politically a little naive.
She was still only in her early 30s at this stage,
yes, of course. She was very young. Anyway, as it happened, events moved very rapidly thereafter. And after the assassination of Ziaul Haq, we were pitted into elections in 1988, November. I was elected from two constituencies in my district, which is Jhang in the province of Punjab. And Benazir was elected from four constituencies, one from what is now KPK, and I believe two from Sindh and one from Punjab. Now, she emerged in that assembly as leader of the opposition. I was asked by some members of the Muslim League to, she emerged as leader of the House, and I was asked by some members of the Muslim League to become leader of the opposition. I had been elected from both my constituencies as an independent candidate. But I declined on the grounds that A, I had a fond memory of late Mr. Bhutto, and B, I did not think that I had the capacity to take on a woman and to give all the men in the house the privilege of watching a cat fight. So I declined, and anyway, I sat on opposition benches. She was leader of the house. We did not get along. We sparred with each other a few times on the floor. And then the assembly was dissolved, and Nawaz Sharif was the successor prime minister, who sent me to represent Pakistan in Washington. Benazir and I did not interact, but I was very particular that whoever I became aware of arrived in Washington from the Pakistan People's Party, people like late Mr. Yahya Bakhtiyar, Abdul Hafiz Pirzada, Mia Ijazul Hassan, to name a few. I would host them and reach out to them and make them feel that the Embassy of Pakistan belonged to all of us Pakistanis, regardless of our political affiliation. Then I came back to Pakistan, and Benazir formed government a second time. And I had lost elections, so we didn't really interact. But to cut a long story short, it was when Musharraf made his intervention. Benazir was supportive of him initially, as was I. And then he dodged us all and decided to dig his heels in. So Benazir and I met. We were both interested, naturally, in meeting each other. This was in Washington. And over a long breakfast, we decided to work together, and we decided to plan a way of getting Pakistan rid of Pervez Musharraf before he did irrevocable harm to our country. So, what had initially been animosity on my part, as well as hers perhaps, became a friendship. And in the last 6 to 7 years of her life, we interacted frequently. I was 6 years older than Benazir, so we fell into a sort of easy camaraderie where I felt I could take any liberty I wanted to. And we laughed a lot together, joked together, even wept together. So, Victoria, the time came when Benazir returned to Pakistan for the second time, had that glorious reception here in the city of Karachi.
October 2007, yes.
That's right. And I found you and Christina Lamb on that truck. And we were waving out to the crowd together when that first bomb blast came. And you girls were clever. You went immediately flat on your bellies and got out of the truck in good time. I was behind you, but I was slower. So I sustained a foot injury, and somehow got through it all. I left Karachi the very next day for my village in Punjab, and Benazir called me a day later, and she said, "How long will it take for you to be well enough to be in Islamabad?" So I told her it would take me another week to 10 days, and she said, "That's perfect, because I'm going to Islamabad in that kind of time frame. And we'll be there together, and there's a lot of work to do." So we were in Islamabad together for a couple of weeks or 10 days. She lived in sector F8 and we live in sector F7, so I was very frequently at her place. And the security she was provided from the government was not efficient, to say the least. Her own security was better, but I frankly thought it wasn't good enough. And I made mention of this to her. I said, Bibi, I don't doubt that we'll win the election. But I have a concern for your security, so please be very, very careful. There was a big gathering of the Pakistan People's Party, which I had joined by then, or rejoined, because I had been with her father's party. We met, there was this great gathering in the garden of Nahid Khan and Safdar Abbasi's home in Islamabad. And I went up to every Sindhi member that I could identify of the party to emphasize to them that we all had to be very, very careful about Benazir Bhutto's security. Everybody shared the concern, but and although Zulfikar Mirza and Agha Siraj Durrani were responsible for her security, they said that Bibi has a tendency to decide suddenly to go this here or there, and then we become kind of helpless and we don't know how to restrain her. And I said that you must assert yourselves, because obviously she's target. What happened when she arrived in Karachi was more than a warning, and she's obviously a target, so we have to somehow handle it. Then there was a moment when she had tried to make a visit with the Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry, who was under detention in his home, and she called me to get there. So I arrived along with Fakhr Imam, my husband, and she was just coming out because the road to his residence was barred. There was a police picket, and she was her car was being reversed from that picket. She saw me because I had gotten out of my car, and she got out of her car, and she linked arms with me and said, Abida, why don't you and I go and have a coffee in the coffee shop of the Marriott?
I think one of the things about Benazir was her spontaneity, and
Yes.
it was a difficult transition for her coming back to Pakistan. I very much felt that the Pakistan she returned to was a very different Pakistan in terms of the security issues, and in a way one of the wonderful attributes about her was that she refused to turn herself into what we call a drawing room politician.
Yes.
I think perhaps just moving on, because obviously the circumstances of her death are all very firmly etched in our mind. One of the things I found tragic about reading Anna's book was that it was, in a way, it's a half-written book. It is a biography to a certain degree, the point at which we know Benazir Bhutto. And we heard from Najam Sethi this morning that he felt in 2007 she'd matured, and we heard some anecdotes from her earlier premierships. Zafar Hilaly, I want to bring you in here on the discussion because you worked with her politically. And as I say, her life was cut short. She was 54 years old when she was killed. Can you just give us some assessments on what you feel the might have been and how you also saw her develop as a politician?
Yes, thank you. Well, I was never a political colleague of Benazir. I was a government flunky chosen by her to serve as her principal staff officer for foreign affairs. And I think where I completely agree with Ms. if I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Surova's book, is that, frankly, in a gathering of international leaders, national leaders, whatever, she had no peer in any setting and in any forum, at home and abroad. And I went with her on 25 visits abroad. She had the ability not only to be conspicuous, but to shine. Her graceful form harmonized, her beauty, if you like, harmonized with the substance of a cultivated, articulate, eloquent, and savvy national leader. Now, if you ask me, and I've come across during the course of 40 years in government service, in the foreign affairs, a lot of leaders. I have yet to meet, certainly in Pakistan, anyone who was even remotely near her in terms of leadership. And I include most emphatically her father. Because he too, I worked for him in his secretariat. I saw him in close quarters. In London, I used to drive him to the odd pub or two. And I tell you, this lady, unlike him, did not have one evil bone in her body. Now, some will say that my judgment is skewed because I was besotted by Benazir. Not so. There has always been a healthy dose of realism in my observations about her. Let me give you an example. She too, like most of our politicians, was clueless about administration, man management, and statecraft. In fact, once on a flight from Malaysia in 1995, she asked me how I felt she was performing. And I said, well, Prime Minister, considering the fact that the only person you ever administered before becoming Prime Minister at the age of 35 was your cook and your ayah, I think you're doing well. To which she said, what nonsense, I led a whole movement. I said, precisely, no doubt, but you know nothing of statecraft or running a government. Najam said earlier that she would have thrown him out of the aircraft because of something he said. Believe me, I thought too that if that aircraft, if I could have been thrown out, I would have been thrown out. That's how she looked at me. But she also had, let me be frank, no clue how to deal with the military, especially those generals with whom she had to interact in the day-to-day running of affairs. To keep them happy, she used to bite her lip, guard her silence, when indeed a contrary approach would have been far more effective. Often, all too often, she would instruct me to consult them, when actually no such consultation was required. So much so that on one occasion I remarked, Prime Minister, the army wants to be led, it does not want to be consulted. At which time she blew her top, saying, do you want the same thing to happen to me as happened last time? But what Bibi failed to understand was that her skittishness in dealing with the generals revealed her weak points, her Achilles heel, and the military took full advantage of it. They demanded and obtained Bibi's decision to let them have their own way, often against her own best interest. And I'm sorry to say that Pakistan has paid a heavy price for her forbearance. Then again, she was a stickler for the rules. Even if, like the arcane rules of business drawn up by the British God knows how many centuries ago, it simply stifled good governance. I recall asking her why, if the constitution of Pakistan could be changed, why on earth not the outdated rules of business? She ignored my question. When I persisted, pointing out that the stack of files I had brought along really did not deserve attention at her level, She continued to ignore me. When finally, in exasperation, I asked why on earth she needed to know and give her approval for the dispatch of a wireless team to service the communication system of our embassy in Kabul, something that had been undertaken annually and had been happening for 44 years, and which could be decided by any functional literate who could lead a calendar, she looked at me very coldly and replied, "Because I like to know." So she had these disabilities, these disadvantages.
But Zafar, can I just interrupt you? Do you think that she had matured, and can we do a little crystal ball gazing and see how things would have been a little different had she survived?
She was a changed person when she came back. I tell you why. She called me. I get a bit emotional sometimes. She called me and she said to me, "I want you to do the same job that you did last time." I said, "Bibi, I can't do the same job. That was 11 years ago. Nothing has happened to you. You seem to have got even more energy. I don't have that energy of slogging over desks for 14 hours every day and coming and meeting you at 10 and 11 o'clock at night." So she said, no, you must. So I said, "I tell you what, let Faratullah Babar cover the domestic side, I'll do the foreign affairs side." And she said, "Okay, but tell me when I'm wrong. Remember, tell me when I'm wrong." This was a totally different Bibi. Bibi didn't want to be told when she was wrong before, but now she was asking me. So after about 2 or 3 meetings, there was a CNN meeting, I remember, and we came out, and I thought to myself, I better tell her that something, otherwise she'll say the chap, he thinks I'm perfect. I've never done anything wrong. So I said, "Bibi, I would stress Baluchistan if I were you in your next meeting." She said, "Yes, but I did talk about it." So I said, "No, not enough." And she said, "All right, good. Remind me next time I will." I want to talk about 1 or 2 things. I'm scared that you might not ask me to talk about 1 or 2 things. That's why I want to...
Okay, well, let me just put a question to Anna first, and then we'll come back to you, Zafar, and also bring back in Abida Hussain. Anna, did your opinion when you were researching Benazir, did it change from that initial impression that you had? Did you see her failings more clearly? Did you think that she'd been worse judged by history than she should have been? How did your own thought process grow as you were researching and writing the book?
Her own writings, because my book arose from her own writings. And I may say that it was born from very focused and slow reading of whatever Bhutto was writing herself. Not only her books like The Daughter of Destiny and The Daughter of the East, but I was very attentive with her speeches, articles, and things like her book, The Way Out. I think that she changed a lot. And by the end of her short life, she had different motivations as those she had in the beginning of her career. And of course, I'm not fortune teller, and the history doesn't have subjunctive mood. But there is a feeling that in Benazir Bhutto, the world lost maybe one of the best leaders of this country. Of course, it is emotional because, as I told you, there is no subjunctive mood in the past. But whatever she wrote at the edge of her death, after she came back to Pakistan, her letters, her small notes, everything which I read and studied so attentively tells that it was a woman of universe who thought about people, not about family only. And of course, this woman can make an absolutely marvelous leader of such a hard country as Pakistan. I am from the same hard country, so I have the right to say that.
I think it's interesting. Oh, well, I always remember she said to me specifically that summer of 2007 that she wanted to go back and make a contribution and really leave a legacy that she felt she hadn't had the opportunity to do in her first two premierships. And as you mentioned, Zafar, she was only 35 when she became Prime Minister, and she said to me, I sort of stepped into an empty office, literally and figuratively, because she had no experience. She hadn't risen up in a government, and that was the nature of military dictatorship, that she hadn't had the opportunity beforehand. Now, you mentioned one other point, so if I can have one point from you, and then I want to go to Syeda, Abida, and then maybe it gets a view of the questions from the floor so that we do have time.
I haven't written a book, perhaps I should, but I'd like to tell the audience one thing which I think has a huge impact on what kind of Pakistan would it have been had she continued. For example, I want to relate to you what she said to me after meeting the former US ambassador in Pakistan in October, 24th October 2007, at which I was also present. It had been a difficult meeting, during which, in response to Ann Patterson's reminder that notwithstanding the events
US ambassador,
yes,
Ann Patterson.
Notwithstanding the events of 18th October, the US Patterson made very clear intended to hold Bibi to her promise to cooperate with Musharraf. Now you can imagine, here's a lady coming out of 18th October, and then couple of days later, going to visit 170 people, relatives, whatever, dead in a hospital. People lying there without arms, trying to get up as she passed by, saying to her, look, I lost this and my son, but I will give this and more for you. Don't worry. And then he pointed out to a boy next to her. I mean, that kind of loyalty, what do we make of it? Number one. Secondly, so when Patterson said, I hold you to your promise to your commitment to cooperate with Musharraf, Bibi just turned around, furious, instinctively, and said, you want me to cooperate with a man who tried to kill me? I knew then that the deal was over. I actually physically put my pen down. I didn't take any more notes. Patterson, she was a reasonably good ambassador, I suppose, somewhat insensitive though, had a job to do perhaps, so she took it in her stride. We got up and she left. And now I want you to picture this scene, that it had obviously been a difficult meeting, a momentous occurrence, a thing had occurred, a development had occurred. The deal was off. So she leans back against the wall and says to me, well, what did you think of the meeting? So I said, well, Bibi, your deal with the Americans and Musharraf is now history. You've said as much to Patterson. You will now have to do to Musharraf what you did to Ghulam Ishaq Khan, namely outwit him politically. Yes, she said, and thumped the table. That's it, I will have to outwit him. Adding, completely out of the blue, by the way, not in context with anything that we had been discussing, adding, but you know, Zafar, if the army can't handle the TTP extremists, then the Americans will have to come in and do it for them. I was shocked. I repeat it. You intend to invite the American forces into Pakistan? I asked incredulously. Implicit was, but you know, with you leading the army should be able to do that, not the Americans. But she nodded. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, she's just added a new slew of enemies to those she already has. And I think on reflection, I think her assassination after that was a foregone conclusion.
That's very...
On the subject, if I may say so
Yes.
briefly, of her assassination,
Yes.
I have with me an SMS that I sent to her on the 21st of February 2007, and her reply. And I said, I'll just go very quickly through it. Pakistan is not at the edge of the proverbial cliff anymore. Actually, it is over the cliff in a free fall mode. The only thing to be determined is that when it lands, will it be dead or merely battered and bruised? The PPP's main, I am tempted to say, only asset is you. And frankly, as a friend, Bibi, how can I advise you to return to face possible assassination at the hands of the antediluvian fundos that can be found everywhere, parading their ignorance proudly in the garb of Islam? Instead, I feel that like Peron, you should wait until you receive the people's invitation to return and assume office. Is there any doubt after the events of the last week, this was in February 2007, that you will at some point of an election campaign be the target of a murder attempt? And if you surround yourself with the kind of security that Mush now does, which is impossible for someone not in office, you will be derided for being scared, etc., etc. It's a difficult choice, I know. But being brave is one thing. Being foolhardy is another. As long as you are well, there is hope. And I selfishly prefer it that way. After all, you have been there and done it. And were it not for the madness that has now gripped this country, you could easily be the people's choice once again. This was her reply. The sudden spurt in attacks on women does give food for thought. As so far, you are the only one in the PPP who thinks I should not return before the elections. I agree with you that madness has gripped the country. How much better things were when we were in government. Just these two bits of information I thought I would pass on.
It's interesting. I think what I'm going to do now, because this is actually a book launch, is open the questions to the floor, because I feel we want to have a little bit of time for that. And maybe you can direct your questions to Anna Suvorova or any of the panelists. So do we have any questions, just to give you a chance to interact? If we don't, we'll carry on talking up here.
Excuse me.
Yes. Perhaps you can identify yourself. Thank you. Do you have to have... have we got some... I think we've got some microphones. Thank you.
My question to Ambassador Hilaly.
Oh, right. Sorry, yes.
Ambassador Hilaly, do you think that...
Could you identify yourself? And I was actually giving the floor to this lady first. Have you got the microphone? Excuse me, just let this lady make her question. Thank you.
I have no connection to politics. I'm a doctor, but Benazir was my ideal, actually, you know. And as a Pakistani woman, we all followed her. My question is that, yes, she did become Prime Minister at 35 without any experience. But had she been from a middle class, with the people, then by 35 you are mature enough to deliver. And I think the problem of this country is that whether it's Sharifs or Bhuttos or whatever, you know, they've grown up in a very elite way. But they did have their jialas, because the father had it, the grandfather had it, you know. So had it been probably, I think this woman had a lot to give at 55, because when I compare my life, I think in 50s, women gets empowerment. Before that, she's a woman. She's a woman, you know, she needs a man to carry her around. She needed Asif Zardari to carry her around, you know. But by 50, every woman says, now I know what to do. and I can run a country, I can run this, I can run my husband, you know, if he is not behaving. So I think this is
So your
where
your question?
my question is that, you know, the reason Benazir was not able to deliver at 35 and 45 when she got 2 chances was because the background was very elite. And what Pakistan needs is a woman who has grown up, you know, with the masses, not idealizing them, and then having some experience. That is why we even have the problems with the Sharifs. You know, if you have not grown up with the masses, look at Obama. I mean, he grew up with the masses. So he's
Syeda,
able to deliver.
Could you answer this? I think it's a very important question for you to answer.
Well, I think Doctor has certainly a point, but whether one matures more rapidly if one comes from a more of a rough and tumble background as opposed to maturing more slowly if one doesn't, I think that's moot point. I think Benazir, in the political sense, when she became Prime Minister, she was fairly mature. She did not have administrative experience. And maybe she was short on an understanding in depth of the institutions of Pakistan, but she was certainly politically mature. So I don't know, it's how you look upon the situation, it's how you view it. For those who watched Parliament, which wasn't covered by the electronic media as well as it is today, alas, but for those who watched the Parliament, Benazir was actually handicapped by her supporters constantly inundating her with requests. When she came and sat in the House, which she did very frequently, she was always surrounded. They wouldn't leave her alone for a moment. And very often she'd be writing recommendations or orders on the applications that were proffered to her without really properly understanding or having the time to absorb what she was signing off on. And many of the errors that were committed resulted from this sort of thing. The opposition, I must confess, myself included, were a little relentless. And, you know, she was not good with criticism. She did not take well to it. So her performance kind of fell short of expectation. Whether it was because of the roots of her background, as I say, is moot point.
Interesting. Anna, do you want to comment on, because you've written a lot in the book on Benazir's position as a woman and indeed in the family. Do you want to comment on whether, in fact, she was from too elite a background to be able to learn administration?
Well, as far as the position in the family, it's a very well-known theory, which is called sibling position. This theory goes back to 19th century and was suggested by the famous psychologist Alfred Adler. But it is true even now that all of us, when we are grown up people, we depend on the position which we held when we were children between our siblings, whether we were the only child, the elder child, the medium child, or the smallest child, youngest child. And in my book, I decided that as far as it is something new, just to look at her as elder child of the family, which she was. And it happened a lot of things that she was for, that she was motivated with, and that she fought. they are very much in vein with her position of the eldest daughter. Even her very harsh and tense relationship with Mir Murtaza, they also goes to the same theory when eldest sister and younger brother fight for supremacy because the most tense position in the family.
It's interesting. This gentleman here, you have your question.
I'm Javed Bozar, a journalist. My question to Ambassador Hilaly. Can we say Anne Patterson's words were warning to Benazir Bhutto?
I just think that they were really thoughtless. I don't think they took into account the feeling of the moment of a woman who had emerged from such a horrible incident. But, but she was doing her job. I mean, the Americans had done a deal. She had signed on. Whether it was wise or not is a different matter. And she was being asked to keep to the deal, notwithstanding what had happened. And she lost it, rightly so. And I don't think after that incident there was any, and if there was any trust between Musharraf and her, there was nothing at the end of it. And, so she had to get rid of Musharraf. And she had to contemplate how she would be able to do that. It was a madness to think that Musharraf could be president with 58-2B and she would continue on as prime minister. But we all know that these elections were going to be rigged. We all know there was an administrative block in K block in Lahore with 7-8 computers. We know who was in charge. We know people were working on it. We know the formula that they were using. So it's out of the question that the future between Musharraf and Bibi would have been anything but tragic, frankly. One thing I would like to say, nobody has raised it, perhaps because it's good, you feel that it's not the right thing to do, and perhaps you're right. But, let's face it, everybody wants to know about money, about corruption. Her husband's corruption, quote unquote, whatever, I don't have proof, I don't know what has been proved, what hasn't, is legendary. And in her case also, everybody, when you talk to them about Bibi, says, magar paise bahut bana li. You see, the point is this, who cares? Frankly, I don't give a damn, and I never gave a damn whether she made money using her official position. What I said was, what is the bargain for us Pakistanis? She represents this. What does the opposition represent? Zero, nothing. I mean, so look at it in terms of saudagiri. Isn't that the best deal you're getting? So what if it costs you a few millions? My God, modern, progressive, liberal, well-run Pakistan. Isn't that what we want? And aren't we prepared to pay any price for that? And look what we are paying now.
I think we perhaps better not get into
Good,
we are
no.
talking about a book launch. Thank you, Zafar. We've got about 5 more minutes for questions. So do we have a question from this gentleman here in the blue shirt? Thank you.
Hello. Hello. So don't you feel that Bibi was victim of international conspiracy, perhaps supported by White House?
Sorry, who is your question to? To any of the panel, whoever wants to answer whether Benazir Bhutto was a victim of a conspiracy instigated by the White House. Anna.
There are so many different colored houses
Not
that were
Anna's
involved
question.
in that. Maybe one was white.
Syeda, Abida, Abida.
Well, to the best of my understanding, in the United States government, like all governments, there are different elements and different factions and different opinions even. I think Dick Cheney didn't really give two pins about Benazir Bhutto. Cheney had a very comfortable relationship with Pervez Musharraf, whom he was able to handle relatively easily. On the other hand, I think Condoleezza Rice had developed a sort of genuine kind of regard for Benazir Bhutto. Condoleezza Rice was concerned about her security as well. In fact, Victoria, that day when we were on that container together and were attacked, when I got up on the container, I had a conversation with Benazir. I had tried to warn her. I was convinced that there were some commandos that had come into Karachi and they were going to be part of the attack. So I run this information by her through the BlackBerry Messenger. She checked with Condi Rice and she said to me, you know, Abida, you're right. Condi's on it. And she says she's doing her best. But she has some sort of resistance within her own ranks. Anyway, whatever happened, happened. Then I met Benazir, you know, she was detained in Lahore. I met her just after she came out from under detention, and I said, you had a conversation with Negroponte on the telephone, the newspapers say. So did you get anything from him, and did you talk about your security? She said, you know, Abida, I had a very long conversation with Negroponte, got nothing from him. I told him no jammers, there's no armor-plated vehicle, etc. And he said he couldn't do anything. So I'm afraid we're on our own. And she said, we have our back to the wall.
On that
Negroponte worked very closely with Dick Cheney.
Thank you. On that note, I have been informed time is up. I'm sorry we don't have time for the last question. I'd like to thank Anna Suvorova, Syeda, Abida Hussain, and Zafar Hilaly very much indeed for discussing Benazir Bhutto, a multi-dimensional portrait. And I really urge you to buy the book because it contains some fascinating insights. And thank you once again to Oxford University Press. Thank you.